Peter Thiel's supposed, and it is still a rumor, his supposed efforts in blood transfusion, otherwise known as parabiosis, where, as the press has run with it, said that he's taking the blood of teenagers and pumping those through his veins. What do you think, more seriously, what do you actually think of things like parabiosis and what Ray's doing with popping 250 pills a day? Are these good methodologies towards what you're trying to achieve, or are these doing exactly the opposite?
I'll start with Ray. So Ray, as most of you probably know, is his main history is in IT. He's made plenty of successes in terms of inventions in tech. But over the past decade or so, he's got a lot of interest in the aging space, and he's written a number of books in this area. The fundamental theme that he has pursued is very similar to mine in the sense of building an incremental building process, which he calls bridges, and he identifies 3 bridges. There's what we can do now, which is called Bridge 1. There's what we can do with biotech in the foreseeable future, which is Bridge 2. And then there's essentially the non-biological stuff, uploading, nanotech, and so on, which is Bridge 3. Now, Bridge 2 is pretty much identically my stuff. So he and I are 100% shoulder to shoulder on that. Fundamental good. Bridge 3, we're also pretty much shoulder to shoulder. I don't consider myself in any way an expert in those areas, but I pay a bit of attention. I appreciate that these things are not nearly so sci-fi as many people would have us believe, and so maybe they're possible. And in particular, I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. Okay. In particular, I certainly believe that it's worth.
There we go. Flow goes my speakers. Aubrey de Grey has a cold, and you better get that checked out, because it can be serious this time, terminal even this time of year.
Shut up. Those who are pursuing these things. My only real departure from Ray in terms of Bridge 3 is that I'm not at all sure that the motivation to go in that direction will really survive after we get the biotech stuff working, the Bridge 2 stuff. So my main interest in Bridge 3 is that it may actually turn out that Bridge 2 is a lot harder than I think, and therefore we need Bridge 3 instead, rather than as well.
And vampirically taking teenage blood?
I'm coming back.
You're getting there.
All
right.
Yeah. So back to Bridge 1. Bridge 1 is an area where Ray and I do definitely differ. And where I feel, basically what we can do now does very little for most people, and can do very little for most people. I believe that Ray has been overly seduced by his own personal experience. And the reason I say that is because Ray himself, this is well known, this is public knowledge, Ray himself drew a bunch of short straws health-wise. He has a lot of cardiovascular disease in his family. He came down with type 2 diabetes in his 30s, which is, it's not unheard of, but it's pretty rare. And, there is plenty of evidence that if you have seriously drawn some short straws, then there are things that you can do with today's medicine that will substantially normalize that, simply because the straws that you've drawn only cover a very small subset of what aging really is, even if fundamentally they are the same processes. So I am kind of, impressed with and not surprised by the fact that Ray has succeeded in bringing his own health condition so well under control. He's in his late 60s now, and as I understand it, he still has no sign of diabetes whatsoever. But I feel that it is absolutely not valid to extrapolate that to the general case, to people who are doing averagely well already, let alone people like myself who are doing unusually well. So that's the difference between us. Okay, so that's my Ray answer. My parabiosis answer, well, yes. So as you say, there is this rumor. I have a feeling that Peter slightly enjoys the rumor. I don't see Peter very much, you understand. He's a very busy guy, but yeah, it's the kind of thing that kind of fits his persona. I think it's extremely unlikely that anything like that is actually happening.
The science behind it. So the rumor comes from the fact that apparently someone at Till Capital phoned Ambrosia, who are doing arguably parabiosis. Let's put Peter aside for a second, but actually talk about that process. Right, is there any scientific proof there?
Okay, so let's go through the league table. So the original work that started back about 10 or 12 years ago now that got everyone's attention was bona fide parabiosis, where you take an old animal and a young animal and you actually join their circulatory systems together. And sure enough, the older animal is the older animal does benefit. The younger animal is not terribly happy. So that's all good. So then the question is, what really is going on? What are the active ingredients? Is that the old animal has bad stuff in their blood that they're less good at clearing than the young animal is? Is it that the young animal has good stuff in their blood that the older animal is making less of? We don't even know that. Different researchers have different opinions on that. I mean, after 10 years, it turns out it's a much harder question to answer than you would hope. Let alone the real question we want to answer, which is what are the active ingredients? So there are half a dozen things out there that people have identified as potential active ingredients, but there's controversy about pretty much all of them. So this is a very, very fertile, active, living research field, and it will remain so for a while. But in the meantime, what do we do? So we funded some work in one of the top parabiosis labs at Berkeley, which looked at the simple question, okay, if you, rather than doing parabiosis, if you do an exchange of plasma. So plasma, first of all, what's that? It's simply blood minus the cells, right? And then exchange obviously means you take out the old person, you put in new stuff. So we did that, and we asked, can we recapitulate the kind of rejuvenating benefits that we get? If you could, that's big news, because of course, first of all, you can do it with multiple young individuals' plasma rather than just one person being connected, right? Second of all, we actually did the way we did the experiment was we just did a one exchange. And we asked like 3 months later or whenever it was, what's the benefit? So that's pretty cool. And it turned out, yes, that most of the benefits that were given by bona fide parabiosis were indeed recapitulated. So that's very great. But then we want to go further, of course. We want to know what the individual ingredients are. What Ambrosia are doing, however, is a very poor man's version of that. I mean, I say poor, they charge 8K for it, you understand. But what they do is plasma transfusion. In other words, they put in some young plasma, but they don't take any of your plasma out. So, of course, that means you can only put a very small amount in, because otherwise the person would explode, right? Which would be kind of bad. It's very curious why there would be any effects at all. There do seem to be some effects. Not least, it's not just Ambrosia. There's another company named Alka-Hest that are doing a very legitimate, very by the book clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease, and they're doing the same thing, plasma transfusion, and they appear to be getting some effects, though it's very modest. Early days.
So the wonderful thing about the Virtual Futures audience is that it's multi-generational. So if you're under 25, if you want to pair up with someone over 50 in the bar afterwards, we can all live forever.
I'm over 50. You can have my beer.
Aubrey will buy you a beer.
No, I won't buy you a beer. I'll transfuse you my beer. You can have my beer in exchange.